I used to think HOA horror stories online were exaggerated until the president of my own HOA sold my ranch while I was out of town for 1 week, called the cops on me for trespassing in my own driveway, and a few months later had to sit there, staring at a steel gate I owned, that she could not legally drive past unless I said so. Yeah, that really happened, and this is how the quiet guy at the end of the street ended up holding the keys to the HOA queen's whole life. My name is Mark Delaney. I am 38, a former EMT, and a couple of years ago, I inherited a 7.5-acre place on the edge of the Arizona desert from my uncle, and for a while I honestly believed I had finally found a little pocket of peace. The house was nothing fancy. 1-story stucco, red tile roof, some solar panels, a crooked chicken coop, and a metal workshop, where I rebuilt old motorcycles, and past my back fence, it was just open desert and big orange sunsets, and after years of sirens and hospital fluorescent lights, that kind of quiet feels like therapy. You know what I mean? The catch was that my little oasis sat inside a subdivision called Silver Creek Ridge, and that meant a homeowners association. 3 letters that can ruin a good thing faster than termites. When my uncle moved in, the HOA was 4 retirees, and a coffee pot dues were low rules, were simple, and as long as your yard did not look like a junkyard, nobody cared. But by the time I got there, a woman named Claudia Briggs had taken over as president and turned it into her personal empire. Claudia is mid-40s, sharp bob haircut, always in a blazer, even when it is 100 degrees clipboard, welded to her hand, and a smile that feels more like a warning than a welcome. And under her watch, our dues jumped from about $180 a year to $900, while the rule sheet grew into a fat binder full of sections and diagrams. At the first HOA meeting I sat through, she talked for 20 minutes straight about protecting property values, like we were some gated golf community instead of a dusty cul-de-sac with pickups and kids' bikes. And I remember thinking, okay, she is intense, but if I keep my place clean and follow the rules, maybe we will never have to talk. That fantasy died on a Tuesday morning after a long night shift when I turned into our street and saw her on my neighbor's porch with that clipboard. My neighbor across from the entrance is Ruth Calloway, late 70s, 5 feet of floral shirts and stubborn kindness. And in her front yard, there is a wooden bird feeder her husband built before he passed away. The kind of thing everyone just quietly respects. As I rolled by, I heard Claudia say in that flat official tone, "Mrs. Calloway, this is your final notice. That bird feeder violates Section 14.2. You have 72 hours to remove it, or the association will issue a $500 fine." And Ruth's hands were shaking as she stared up at that feeder and whispered, "My Herald made that." And Claudia just said, "Rules are rules. Silver Creek Ridge has standards." Then let her eyes slide down the street to my place. My house sits where the pavement ends, and the dirt starts a little more country than the others, but fully permitted. And apparently that offended her, because she walked right over heels, clicking, and said, "Miss Delaney, since you are home, we need to complete your 6-month property inspection." I was still in my EMT uniform, exhausted, but I had actually read the bylaws, so I said, "Morning. Claudia, the bylaws say inspections need 48 hours. Written notice, Section 6.1. If you have concerns, you can send them in writing, but you are not walking my property today." And for half a second, I saw something ugly flash across her face. She smoothed it over, fast, gave me a tight smile, and said, "Fine. Consider this official notice Friday at 9 a.m. then turned away, like she had not just tried to walk through my front line. The EMT part of my brain, the part that gets ready before a call goes sideways, kicked in. For the next 2 days, I pulled permits receipts, photos, everything I had, and put it into a neat folder. Friday morning, she showed up right on time with 2 board members trailing behind her, and I met them at the gate with my phone recording and said, "Before you come in, I would like you to state for the record what potential violations you are inspecting for." Then watched her circle my fence, my solar panels, my coop, my workshop, taking measurements and pictures looking for any excuse. The longer she walked, the tighter her jaw got, because everything was legal. And finally, she stepped close enough that the others could not hear, and said quietly, "You think you are clever, Mark, but I have been running this community for 4 years. Nobody challenges me and wins if I have to. I will make sure you do not live here much longer." And I just lifted my phone a little higher and said, "Good thing I record things that matter," still thinking it was just a petty neighborhood power trip. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope from the association landed in my mailbox, with assessment balance due across the top. And according to that thing, my uncle had fallen behind on dues during his illness, and with late fees and administrative charges, I now owed about $7,600, and down in the tiny print it mentioned loans and asset recovery procedures. The math did not match the fee schedule. I had read the dates looked off, so I called the attorney who had handled my uncle's estate, and he said he remembered some HOA paperwork, thought it had been taken care of, and would check. And while that was hanging over my head, my little sister in Colorado called sobbing, because her husband had walked out, and her son was in the hospital with pneumonia. I stood there with the phone in one hand, and that letter in the other, and made the same calculation. A lot of people would make, I told myself, it is a bill, and some legalese. They are not going to take a house in 1 week. I will deal with it when I get back. Locked up, fed the chickens, and flew out to help her. That one choice is the crack Claudia shoved a wrecking ball through. A week later, I drove back into Silver Creek Ridge, turned down my little road, and there was a moving truck in front of my garage, a white SUV in my driveway. Strangers carrying boxes through my front door, and a new welcome mat with someone else's last name, where mine used to be. And for a second, I honestly thought I had turned onto the wrong property. Then I saw Claudia in the driveway holding a folder like a trophy. She smiled wide and said loud enough for everyone, "Mr. Delaney, you are just in time to watch the new owners move in. Since you failed to cure your delinquent assessment balance, the association proceeded with foreclosure, and the property was sold at auction." My brain was playing catch-up while my stomach dropped, and I said, "What are you talking about? This is my house. I never got any foreclosure. Notice, no court date, nothing. I have been gone for 1 week." And the woman from the white SUV walked over holding papers and said quietly, "We bought it through a legal foreclosure sale. The HOA president handled everything we were told." You had abandoned it. Before I could even process what she said, Claudia had her phone out and was saying, "Yes, this is Claudia Briggs with Silver Creek Ridge. We have a former resident refusing to leave after a legal foreclosure. He appears agitated, and I am concerned for everyone's safety." And that phrase, "former resident," punched harder than I like to admit. Deputies showed up, looked at the deed with the new family's name, flipped through Claudia's foreclosure packet with its certified mail receipts and official language, and one of them, Gomez, pulled me aside and said, "Off the record, this smells wrong. But right now, they have the title, 'If you stay, you are trespassing.' If there is fraud, you fight it in civil court, not in this driveway." So I drove away from my own house with 2 suitcases and a toolbox, checked into a cheap motel off the highway that smelled like old smoke and bleach, and sat at a wobbly little table spreading out Claudia's photocopies, like evidence bags. The more I looked, the worse it got. The fees did not match the rules. The dates on the letters did not match the postmarks, and the signature on those certified mail receipts looked like someone had taken their time tracing my name instead of me scribbling it at the door. The next morning, I went to the county law library, found a quiet table, and started reading everything I could about HOA liens and foreclosure, and it really did feel like discovering a hidden rulebook. Nobody hands you until you are already losing. Buried in those case listings, I saw 2 other recent HOA foreclosures from our subdivision, both pushed by the board, both houses sold cheap to people connected to Claudia. And I was still putting that together when I heard my name. It was Ruth clutching a manila envelope, and she sat across from me and said, "Mark, I was not sure if I should bring this, but Harold worked for the county for 30 years. He kept copies of things, and he never trusted that woman," and slid the envelope over. Inside were letters from the county environmental department, old inspection reports, and a handful of nighttime photos. And that is how I found out Claudia's picture, perfect corner lot, used to be a small gas station with underground tanks. There had been suspected leaks, and the county had been trying to get her to cooperate with testing and cleanup for years. The photos showed a figure who looked a lot like her dumping buckets and paint cans into a shallow pit behind her fence at night. And suddenly, her obsession with squeezing every dollar out of the neighborhood made a different kind of sense, because if those contamination reports ever stuck, she could be staring at a 6-figure cleanup bill. That was the moment something in my head shifted from, "Poor me, I lost my house," to, "Okay, this is a hazmat situation." And in that world, you do not win by yelling. You win by documenting and calling the right people. A few days later, the forecast called for a big winter storm. So before dawn, I parked on a public street behind her property, set my phone up on the dash, and watched the rain turn her yard into a shallow river. And within an hour, there was a clear rainbow sheen on the runoff, heading toward a storm drain. And the air through my cracked window smelled like a gas station floor. I filmed everything, wrote down times and locations, scooped a couple of samples into clean jars, and the next morning I walked into the county building where the environmental crimes unit works and told the receptionist I needed to talk to whoever was on duty. I ended up across from a detective in a cramped office full of files and coffee cups, laid out the samples. The letters Ruth had given me, the photos, and my foreclosure paperwork, and said, "I think our HOA president has been hiding a serious contamination problem and using foreclosures to keep herself afloat instead of fixing it." She did not promise anything, just listened, took notes, and made copies. But 2 weeks later, unmarked trucks with county plates and EPA logos rolled into Silver Creek Ridge, and people came out on their porches because hazmat suits in your cul-de-sac will do that. The look on Claudia's face when she opened her door and saw them with testing gear is one I wish I could have framed. And of course, she tried her routine. "This is a misunderstanding. I will have my attorney call you." But the lead agent calmly reminded her that interfering with a federal environmental investigation was a bad idea. The short version of what they found is that the soil under her lot was loaded with petroleum and solvents way above safe limits that contamination had spread under several nearby houses, including the ranch they had taken from me. And because she had known and never disclosed it, the foreclosure and sale suddenly looked a whole lot like fraud. Her house was condemned until a cleanup plan could be funded. The state suspended her real estate license. Her accounts were frozen, and to help pay for remediation, the county scheduled a special auction for her contaminated lot, and the narrow strip of private road that served it. Most folks saw buyer assumes cleanup liability and backed away fast, but when I pulled the plat map, I realized that Strip Mesa Ridge Lane was also the only paved access to a little cluster of houses at the back, including the apartment Claudia was now renting. And the irony of that almost made me laugh right there in the records office. I sold my truck, one of my bikes, anything I could live without. Ruth showed up with cash from a savings account and said, "Harold would want you to finish this." And I walked into that auction with a little under 15 grand and my heart pounding. There were two other bidders, a cleanup company rep who checked out when the price climbed, and an investor who bailed as soon as he heard the words environmental liability. And in the end, I bought the lot and the road for $5,800 and walked out of the courthouse, the legal owner of the only road Claudia and her neighbors could drive on. About a month later, a crew installed a heavy steel gate across Mesa Ridge Lane with a sign that said, "Private property, access by permission only," and my name and number underneath, and Claudia rolled up just as they were testing the lock. Hit the Brakes jumped out and started yelling that they could not block a public road. I held up my deed and said, "Good news, it is not public. It never has been. And I own it now." And she called 911. And when Deputy Gomez arrived, checked the plat and told her, "Ma'am, this has always been a private road. He owns it if you need access. That is a civil issue between you and him. We cannot make him open that gate." Watching her hear the system say no to her, for once felt like the universe finally evening the score. I did not block ambulances. I did not lock anyone in. During an emergency, I set one simple rule: if anyone on that spur needed to come and go, including Claudia, they had to email me 24 hours ahead so I could plan to unlock and relock. And yeah, some people called it petty, but it also felt like the first time she had ever been forced to live with someone else's rules. Around the same time, the EPA formally voided the foreclosure on my ranch because of the undisclosed contamination. The sale to the new family was reversed, and they were made whole from a victim fund. My uncle's place went back into my name, and a new HOA board got elected and immediately killed a bunch of Claudia's worst rules, including the one about Ruth's bird feeder. So that is how I went from being a former resident, walked off my own driveway, to the guy who literally holds the key to the road the ex-HOA president has to use to get to work and to court. And I still turn it over in my head sometimes, whether buying that road and hanging that gate was justice or just revenge dressed up in paperwork. You tell me if I went too far, or if I just spoke the only language she ever respected. Because from where I am standing, it feels like balance. But I know some of you are going to see it differently. If you have ever had your own Claudia or your own HOA horror story, throw it down in the comments. Tell me what you would have done in my place. And if you like hearing about bullies getting knocked over by the very system they used on everyone else, hit subscribe and send this to that one neighbor who is one violation notice away from losing it. Because sometimes the quiet guy at the end of the street is the only one who knows exactly which rule is going to flip the whole game.